Standard physics models, like Einstein's E equals mc squared, are perfectly accurate in their measurements of reality, but they are mathematically incomplete. They do not describe the primary source of physical phenomena. They describe a projected layer. The oscillatory dynamics and topological bifurcation theory, or ODTBT framework, classifies our entire observable physical reality as the O2 layer. It is a lower dimensional projection space. Beneath this observable layer exists a five-dimensional scalar coherent substrate, designated as S5. This substrate is the actual field from which all physical structure emerges. The mathematical mechanism that compresses the S5 bulk into the O2 observable layer is the projection operator. It maps a five-variable coherent state by passing it through an observer phase alignment, denoted as omega r, to yield a two-variable output. During this projection, specific physical data is strictly mathematically lost. The recursion depth, the scale of the system, and the phase differences between interacting variables are stripped away, leaving only an observable phase signature and a spatial pattern. Because we live inside the output of this equation, we cannot observe the full state directly. To understand how discrete physical matter actually forms, we have to map the exact mathematical limits of our observational projection. Only then can we deduce the field dynamics occurring outside of it. In 380 BCE, Plato described prisoners chained in a cave, perceiving only shadows on a wall. This allegory is almost exclusively taught as philosophy, but structurally it is an exact topological isomorphism for the ODTBT projection architecture. This diagram maps the formal correspondence. The 3+1 dimensional spacetime we inhabit is the cave itself. The physical events we observe, denoted as SEUK emissions, are the shadows. And the underlying scalar substrate, phi c, is the sun existing entirely outside the cave. Between the substrate and the shadows is the fire. In the field equations, the fire is c, the speed of light. It is not a fundamental limit of the substrate itself. It is strictly the resolution rate of the projection geometry. It determines how fast coherence events can resolve into visibility. Operating within this cave, standard physics functions as an incredibly precise shadow science. By utilizing the resolution rate squared, c squared, observers successfully map the relationship between the shadows of locked coherence, which we measure as mass, and released coherence, which we measure as energy. But the objects actually passing before the fire, casting those shadows of mass and energy, are the full five-dimensional coherent states. Human observation is structurally chained to the projection layer. We cannot simply turn around and look at the source. We have to analyze the extreme mathematical boundaries of the field equations to isolate the true nature of the five-dimensional objects. To find the boundary, we have to ask what the field mathematics dictate at the absolute pre-emission state, designated as z equals 0. What exists before any physical identity forms? The z equals 0 state represents the undifferentiated scalar coherence field. It is characterized mathematically by having zero phase strain, written as delta phi equals 0. There is no tension and no drive toward change. The dynamics of this field are governed by the Euler-Lagrange field equations, which are derived directly from the recursive scalar Lagrangian, or RSL, stack. Within these field equations are two specific emission lock conditions. For any physical identity to form and become observable, both of these mathematical conditions must be satisfied simultaneously. Substituting the vacuum's zero phase strain into the second lock condition, the sign of 0 vanishes the right side, forcing the coherence memory, the RCR variable, to exactly 0. Substituting this into the first lock condition leaves the final output, 0 equals negative beta times f. Assuming any non-zero coupling parameter, stating that 0 equals a negative value is a fatal mathematical contradiction. The equations simply cannot be balanced. This derives the vacuum exclusion theorem. The z equals 0 vacuum is structurally pre-emission. The mathematics definitively bar any physical identity from forming in an unstrained field. Because the absolute vacuum is excluded from producing identity, observable reality has to emerge at the very first minimal departure from zero phase strain.
We mark this transition out of the vacuum as moving to state z equals 1.
To model this, we linearize the emission lock conditions around this infinitesimal point of departure, analyzing the math right as the strain begins to build. This linearization yields a transcendental base state equation. The variable x here represents the ground state memory, identifying the allowed memory configurations right at the vacuum boundary. The roots of this equation are critical. The solutions dictate an exact number of allowable ground state configurations, the physical identities that successfully emerge from the vacuum. Look closely at the variable scaling the cosine function. The entire solution structure is governed by a single dimensionless coupling product, defined as C, which combines the coherence energy scale, the phase frequency coupling, and the memory modulation frequency. As this parameter C increases, the oscillating nature of the cosine function forces the equation to repeatedly cross the zero axis. Each crossing produces new, distinct solution roots. The capacity for our universe to host multiple, distinct physical identities is not an arbitrary input or a fitted variable. It is a structural consequence hard-coded directly into the single, dimensionless coupling product. This graph maps the allowed ground state identities against the increasing coupling product C. Tracking the solutions reveals a precise pi-periodic tangent bifurcation cascade. New pairs of identity solutions emerge exactly at coupling thresholds of pi, 2 pi, and 3 pi, creating a strict odd solution hierarchy. This base state equation shares a direct structural isomorphism with the classic Ising mean field equation, used to describe magnetization and phase transitions in materials. Comparing the fixed point geometries, the Ising model relies on a monotonic hyperbolic tangent function, shown in red. Its curve flattens out, allowing a single pitchfork bifurcation, yielding maximum 3 states. The ODTBT oscillating cosine curve, shown in blue, generates an infinite cascade of accessible states. The emergence from the z equals 0 vacuum into the z equals 1 state is a literal phase transition in the Landau-Diels-Ginzburgs. The math predicts a universe with a hierarchically unbounded periodic table of distinct accessible states. To ensure the linearization process didn't create artificial artifacts, the results must be validated against the full, unlinearized emission lock conditions computed in configuration space. This plot displays the lock condition 0 contours. The two lock curves possess fundamentally different topologies. Because one is steep and the other oscillates, they do not form continuous manifolds. They produce discrete, isolated intersection points. These isolated points in the phase, strain, and coherence memory space are the true 5-dimensional ground state identities that are mathematically permitted to exist. Returning to the projection architecture, these discrete mathematical lock points are the actual objects from Plato's cave. They are the dense coherent structures casting the observable shadows onto the wall of our reality. The rich multiplicity of our physical universe, the diverse array of particles and elements, is a mandatory structural consequence of the coherence potential's geometry. Observing this 5-dimensional substrate empirically poses a massive challenge. It requires analyzing a system where phase information successfully bypasses the standard projection boundary. The Advanced Cymatics experimental program physically targets this exact boundary by applying non-Maxwellian acoustic driving forces to vibrating Chladni plates. A vibrating Chladni plate acts as a control case. The acoustic driving frequency functions as the fire, setting the C resolution rate for the medium, and it casts the 5-dimensional coherence geometry into a visible 2-dimensional macroscopic mode pattern in the sand. By utilizing driving signals that carry specific phase information, we can selectively activate symmetric and antisymmetric channels. This bypasses the normal projection limits, forcing the plate to reveal the pure topological signature of the underlying bifurcation cascade. Standard physics remains the ultimate, incredibly precise tool for measuring the shadows on the wall, but the rigorous mathematics of the ODTBT boundary finally provide the theoretical scaffolding required to turn around, look past the projection, and analyze the fire.